Now we're going to talk about theory of mind. So what is it? It's the concepts you hold about other people's thoughts. Can you imagine what other people are thinking? Can children understand that other people think differently than they do? Remember, they're still struggling between the distinction between mental and external events. And they also need to learn the difference in how things appear and how they really are. They need to be able to infer thoughts, perceptions, and feelings of others. This is all part of theory of mind. According to Piaget, preschoolers are too egocentric and too focused on external appearances to have theory of mind. However, research has shown preschoolers can accurately predict and explain human action and emotion. They are beginning to understand where knowledge comes from. So one way that theory of mind is tested is through something called false belief tasks. I have a video here for you to watch that's the classic experiment. Please pause this lecture and go watch it. So the ability to understand false beliefs comes from executive functions such as working memory, sustained attention, self-control, and again, prefrontal cortex needs to develop for those to happen. So how does a 3-year-old perform on this task or similar tasks? Well, an egocentric 3-year-old will say where the toy is because they know where it is, never mind what the other child has seen. A 4 or 5-year-old will realize that the other child will look where he or she believes it is, not where it really is. So theory of mind is something that seems to develop around the age of 4. So why is it important? Why do we cover it? Well, part of putting themselves in another's perspective that's part of theory of mind, and it's really important for social development. It's important for social emotional growth. You need to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand what they might be thinking and feeling. So now we're going to talk about memory. So recognition and recall. Recognition, this is remembering something that you've seen before. So you're looking if someone can indicate whether or not information has been presented before. So they present things to children and say, does this look familiar? Have you seen it before? Recall is individual reproduces material from memory without any cues. Can they remember something they've been told? Preschoolers can recognize more than they can recall. Young preschool children seem to be just as good at recognition as older preschoolers, but their recall greatly improves. When memory tests were done in a lab devoid of meaning, it appeared that preschoolers had poor memory relative to other children. When tasks were given meaning, however, young children did much better. So they remember things better that have meaning to them. Young children also remember things very literally. They will repeat something that was said to them verbatim. You might have heard a young child quote a movie or a book. When we get older, we start to remember things in a more abstract way. We can tell you what the conversation was about, but we can't repeat every word. Scripts and autobiographical memory. Children as young as 1 can remember a sequence of events, a routine, so to speak. By age 4, children can remember events that occurred a year and a half earlier. Young children can form scripts, so these are like a series of events or things to do that they have to remember. Unusual or emotional experiences can be remembered in detail for years. This is called flashbulb memory. So when you have an event that happens with a deeply emotional connection, we remember it much better. And scripts get more elaborate with repeated experience. So the more times you do it, the more you can remember it and the more steps you can add to it. Autobiographical memory is just the memory of specific events or episodes. Just be wary about autobiographical memory. Preschoolers are very suggestible. So they might remember something one way, but then if you kind of coach them or suggest that something else happened, they'll swear they remember it happening the other way. This is part of why preschoolers don't make good eyewitnesses. It's part of the thought versus reality problem. If you can put the thoughts in their heads, they may think that's what really happens. They still have a hard time distinguishing thoughts and reality. So you have to be very careful when questioning preschoolers so you don't inadvertently create false memories. So what are some factors that influence memory? Well, the type of memory matters. Preschoolers remember activities more than objects. They're better at remembering events that follow a logical order than events that can occur in any order. So they might remember the steps of baking cookies better than they can remember the series of events they did when playing in the sandbox. Their interest level matters. We pay attention to things that interest us. I'm sure you remember more from the classes that you liked than those you didn't. Remember flow theory? Things we do in a state of flow stay with us longer. So if we're more interested in something and it puts us in a flow state, we'll remember it much longer. And then retrieval cues. Preschoolers depend more on cues from adults than older children. So they'll look more to an adult to help them remember something than an older child would. So, for example, I ask my son to tell someone what we did that day. He says, I don't remember. I say, we played a game, remember? What was it? He can then name the game and describe it. So he just needed that little cue to help him get started. When parents encourage the child to provide information to the narrative, the children remember the episode better than when parents just provide reminders. So to encourage a child's memory, you need to encourage them to add to the narrative and ask them leading questions to help them retrieve all the memory. And you can help them improve their memory with that sort of thing, and the Whole Brain Child talks about how to do that more. The type of measure also matters. When children are just asked to recall, such as through a verbal report, they have a much harder time. But if you have them reenact something with dolls or toys, they have much better recall. That's part of why play therapists use dolls and puppets for young children to help them remember something. Memory strategies. Adults and older children can use strategies to help with recall. We've learned how to use rehearsal, mnemonic devices, organize information into categories, etc. Preschool children don't use these strategies on their own. By age 5, children have learned to use rehearsal, and they can verbalize information silently to themselves, which helps with memory. Memory strategies can be scaffolded, however, we can teach them and guide them through it. Cognition and language. A child gains the ability to discriminate between animals on the basis of distinct features, such as size or patterns. At the same time, the child is acquiring words that represent broader categories, such as mammal or animal. Is this a coincidence, or are the development of cognitive abilities and language abilities connected? Well, which comes first, cognition or language? Does cognitive advancement allow us to develop new language? Or does the development of more advanced language change the way we think? What do you think? Well, Piaget believed that thought comes first and is followed by language. A child must have a mental concept of something before getting the word that represents that concept. Children learn words to describe schemas they have already created. Children gain the ability to put two words together at the same time they can put two or more actions together. Are these events related? Piaget thought they were. Vygotsky, on the other hand, says that language comes first, followed by thought. Children hear a new word and have to understand it by searching for the characteristics that set that word apart. They have to create a schema to fit a word. Originally, Vygotsky believed that initially thought and language are separate systems, and they merge around the age of 3. At this point, they become interdependent on each other. Thought becomes verbal, and speech becomes representational. When these two ideas fully merge, children's monologues internalize and become inner speech. And Vygotsky believed it was this internalization that drives cognitive development. So Vygotsky studied language a lot, and he said that there are 3 types of speech. The first is social speech. This is the external communication that we use to talk to other people, and we see this typically from the age of 2. Then there's private speech, otherwise known as outer speech. We see this typically from age 3. At first, children's thoughts are spoken aloud. Have you ever heard a young child with a running monologue of what they're playing, even if no one else is in the room with them? They often use this private speech when they're engaged in a difficult task. It's directed to themselves, and it serves an intellectual function. It helps them regulate their actions and emotions. It helps with what's called self-collaboration, which is essentially scaffolding themselves. It helps them plan activities and strategies. It helps facilitate cognitive processes. And it helps them regulate their emotions. Vygotsky was the first psychologist to talk about the importance of private speech. He considered it the transition between social and inner speech, and it was the moment in development when thought and speech merge. It is very important for development So you shouldn't get angry at children for using it or tell them to be quiet. This private speech serves a very important function. Then we get to inner speech. Private speech becomes quieter and then becomes completely internal. This is typical from about age 7. As children develop, speech becomes internalized. What was spoken aloud in preschool years gets spoken internally in middle childhood. Inner speech is the merging of thought and language. It helps with self-regulation, memory, etc. You may find that even as an adult, when we should have inner speech, sometimes we still engage in private speech when confronting a very difficult problem or helping us remember things. So just remember that all of these types of speech serve a function. The child begins to perceive the world not only through his eyes, but also through his speech. Lev Vygotsky. In the next video, we are going to talk about how children learn grammar.